field. But what we lack in proximity, we make up for in the film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond in the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane Page. I am your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter at Shane Haff NFL. And I am joined by BGN's own resident film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Johnny, how are you doing this evening?
It's been a few weeks, Shane. I guess we should address the elephant in the room that we are back. Yeah, what a strange time. I was away when it all sort of kicked off. So obviously, if you haven't followed any of the news, BGM radio just completely shut down the whole thing. We've done this for a few months and we decided that we should keep it going, basically. So we're going independent currently. I noticed you've still got On the Shane Page 25, not number 1. So we're keeping it rolling. So yeah, 24 episodes. I didn't even realize how many we've done. That's pretty crazy. So yeah, obviously it sort of sucked. It's a little bit, it's strange. I'm very glad to be back. I feel incredibly bad for a lot of people who work for BGM Radio. There were some fantastic guys on there. But yeah, hopefully this works. Fingers crossed. But yeah, we're looking forward to it, especially today and next week's episode. I've gone full like draft nuts. So I am really excited for the first few rounds. Probably more work than I've ever done for the draft. It's just, in fact, not having the podcast as well and having a bit more time, I haven't written as much as well. I've just sort of been diving into the film. So yeah, that'll be a good one. But yeah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. And yeah, we are branching into live video casts. So you could be watching this right now live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter. We will also be posting it in a podcast feed. So we purchased podcast hosting. Search On the Shane Page wherever you get your podcasts. You may have to like filter by shows because it's going to start to pull up the old BGN episode titles. But we are I have confirmed we're in Spotify and Apple iTunes right now. We should be anywhere you can look for podcasts. So if there's a place that you get your podcasts and it's not there, let me know and I will try to get that up and running. Also worth mentioning, we are independent now, which means no longer being paid by BGN, at least for podcasts. Johnny's still on staff as a writer. And we had to purchase our podcast hosting. So we've had people reach out to us about contributing. We have set up a way for you to do that if you are interested in contributing to the show, which is free. We intend for the show to remain free. We intend for it to remain ad-free. But if you would like to contribute to the support of the show, you can do that on Cash App. We are at On the Shane Page, at PayPal, On the Shane Page. Links to both are in my link tree on Twitter. I will also tweet about it. And so any contribution there is appreciated. We had some people ask about like recurring monthly subscription based thing, and we'll work out some details on that. We're talking about maybe a way to allow you guys to make monthly contributions if you want to and have a say in like directing the direction of the podcast, giving us specific players you want us to talk about, things like that. But we'll work all of that out for now, but down the road. But for now, we're excited to be back, excited to be live, and excited to talk about day 1 and 2 draft prospects. So we've got this show and one more show before the draft. Today, we're going to talk about the offensive side of the ball. Next week, we'll talk about defense, and we're going to give you guys some top day 1 and day 2 targets on each side of the ball. Johnny has a lot to say because he's done a lot of draft work, and we have not talked about it on this podcast. You guys may know a little more where I stand from the draft show work. Johnny's a wild card here, so we're going to dig into some guys. And so, Johnny, why don't you kick us off here? Let's start with some potential trade-up candidates in the first round of the draft. Who are some guys that you could see the Eagles trading up for in the first round, or even just some guys that you're interested in a trade-up scenario?
Yeah, so I have got a lot of draft takes, as we mentioned. So I've tried to do the draft a little differently this year. So I've tried to, and it's really difficult because I play a lot of Dynasty and I always try and rank them based on like fantasy production. But I've tried to really do it as in what the Eagles will need. And I've tried to reflect that in my rankings. Now, the hard thing about this year is that we've got 2 new coordinators. So it's really hard to do. The good news is Fangio, I think we know pretty well by now. And even Kellen Moore, I feel like I watched so much film. I have a reasonably good feel. So I've ignored quarterback. Like I've just not done it. And I love watching quarterbacks. I just haven't watched them because I just don't think it's a need for the Eagles. So I don't even think they'd be on the Eagles board, essentially. And obviously, like you said, what if Caleb Williams there at 22? That doesn't count because he's not going to. So I've not bothered including him. So I have about, not including the quarterbacks, I have about 5 offensive players in sort of my like gold tier, like top 10. It won't shock anyone. It's the 3 receivers. I don't think I would trade up for any of them because I realistically don't expect there to be there. The top offensive lineman I have, once again, I don't think is a realistic trader candidate up, which is Joe Alt, and I think most people are in a similar boat. I think the interesting name to kick things off with, Shane, is what do we do if Brock Bowers falls slightly lower than we expect? Because I think there's a realistic chance with tight end value, with tight end money. I think there is, because I'll be honest, I don't have many trade up candidates. I quite like the spot the Eagles are at, actually. I think there's going to be a lot of good talent there. I don't exactly know how many players I have on my board, but I think there's a good amount because the offensive line is just so stacked, which we might get to. So the only one that I'd actually probably consider trading up on the offensive side, because I wouldn't bother trading up for someone like Brian Thomas. As much as I like Brian Thomas, there's no way I'm trading up for a receiver with his current class. I don't feel the need to trade up for an offensive lineman, I don't think, because I think there's like 6, 7 maybe guys at 22 that could be sensible picks. So you can maybe disagree, and I'm discounting the top 3 receivers here because I think they all go top 10 because I think they are so good. So Brock Bowers is the interesting one. I basically think the only concern, literally the only weakness I put down for Bowers is that he hasn't got traditional size to be an inline tight end. But I even wrote in my notes, like, who cares? Like, does anyone really care about that much these days? Extremely athletic, unbelievably good route runner, extremely sudden, yards after catch, something I think the Eagles would do, like natural hands, can extend away from his body. Like, you just tick every box for Brock Bowers that I want to see. But he is a tight end, and tight ends don't go that early historically, and tight ends can struggle. And he didn't test either, which maybe doesn't matter, but maybe does in the eyes of some teams. So let's start it there. At what stage, or would you ever even consider moving up for a tight end? And because I'm basically saying I'm saying I think Bowers is somebody that I would consider moving up to, maybe if he falls beyond 16. I don't really have any other names. So I'll throw you 2 questions. Firstly, what do you think about the potential move up for Bowers? Anyone else that you would have on the offensive side of the ball? Defense is different, by the way. I do have guys I'd move up for on defense, but on offense, he's the only one name that I can realistically see myself considering a trade up. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I love Brock Bowers. I think I've been saying for a while that I think Brock Bowers could fall into the mid to late teens. And I feel like people are catching up to that now because, I did a first round mock draft on Chalk Talk last night and he started to fall. And realistically, like, if he makes it past the Jets at 10, and I would argue the Jets should absolutely be thinking offensive line, not tight end. If he makes it past the Jets at 10, it gets a little difficult to find a spot for him. The Colts have been interested in him at 15. I think the Colts have bigger needs. And then I circle Cincinnati at 18 as a team that I think that's the floor for Brock Bowers. And so if he starts to fall and Indianapolis doesn't take him at 15 and the Eagles want him, I would certainly be on the call or on the phone with Seattle at 16, with Jacksonville at 17, trying to move up ahead of the Bengals to take Brock Bowers. And I would love that pick. You mentioned his size. He's still lined up 37% of the time in line at Georgia. And so, he's not the strongest blocker, but he's willing. And we've talked about before how much we like 12 personnel. But the thing about 12 personnel is if your second tight end can't block and catch, you sort of tip your hand. And Brock Bowers can do both. Is he as good of a blocker as Dallas Goedert? No, but he's a better blocker than anybody else the Eagles have at tight end. And when you think about his receiving ability, I would argue it's maybe better than Dallas Goedert's. And so I would love the fit with Brock Bowers. And, Dallas Goedert, he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's been injured several times. He's missed games over the last couple of years. And he's the same age that Zach Ertz was when the Eagles drafted Dallas Goedert. Now, granted, that was a second-round pick. Brock Bowers is a lot better prospect coming out than Dallas Goedert was. So I would be really interested in Brock Bowers if he starts to fall. We've got a comment coming in live here off of Twitter from John that says,
wow, we get live comments now.
We do. Yeah, it's great. Interesting thing about Bowers is he allows us to put off drafting a wide receiver because he can function out of the slot, which is a perfect point because he did take over 50% of his snaps from the slot. And I think wide receiver is something every team that's smart should be drafting on day 2, given what wide receiver contracts have done. If you took Brock Bowers in the first, you probably take the Eagles off the hook for that. You're not going to spend a second round pick more than likely on a receiver, but it would allow you to go different positions. So I like the fit for a lot of reasons, and I'd be very interested in Bowers.
Yeah, I think that you nailed it there. John, want to comment about the putting off you taking a receiver? It does. Essentially, you wouldn't need to target one as much because you're going to play a hell of a lot of 12 personnel. People get really obsessed with like 2 tight ends, and I've spoken at depth about 12 personnel. It became a bit of an obsession with mine a few off seasons ago. So time and time again, for those of you that haven't heard it before, it only matters if they can both block. It has zero impact if they can't, because teams will just treat you like you're playing 3 wide receivers, and it completely loses all of its impact. So unless you've got a tight end who can block, and I do think he can block, he can absolutely contribute in the run game. Like, he's a perfectly fine blocker. So he's the only guy. Did you have anyone else, Shane? Anyone else who you would consider moving up for? I think he's my only one. I'm having a look at my offensive line list as well. I would maybe consider JC Latham as well, the Alabama guy. And we'll talk more about offensive line in a little bit. So before I get to Latham, let me throw it back to you. Is there anyone else that you would consider moving up, or is it just Bowers?
I don't think there's anyone else that's realistic. I mean, certainly I'm a huge Rome Odunze guy. I have Rome Odunze as a blue chip player in this draft. He's not going to get within striking distance, and the Eagles should not leverage that much capital to move up for a receiver with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, nor should they, just spend a first-round pick overall on a receiver there probably. So I would not be – I love those guys, but I just don't think there's anybody else realistic to trade up for in the first round on the offensive side. I've got some defensive guys we'll get to next week, though.
Yeah, wicked. Let's go to the rest of the first round then. So trade up wise, it's actually pretty narrow on offense. I want to talk a little bit about my structure of building the board for the rest of round 1, because I think 22 is such an interesting position. So except for Brock Bowers, no tight end, no running back, obviously no quarterback. So it really only leaves you with receiver and offensive line to talk about today. So receiver, I have Brian Thomas as my receiver 4. I have AD Mitchell as my receiver 5. AD Mitchell wouldn't kill me if he was to pick at 22, but he's not really the guy I'd be after. I think there are concerns there in terms of effort. I think actually I've just read that there's some concerns about sort of health as well. I haven't gone into too much detail. Maybe that explains some of the effort as well. He's an absolute explosive freak. Like, one of those guys is just like ridiculously athletic, like long speed, everything basically AD Mitchell you could possibly want, except for things like effort. And you worry a little bit, is he one of those like explosive freaks who needs a little bit of help? So he's not really my go-to. When we spoke last, Shane, about a month ago, I said about my disdain for taking offensive line at 22. I have totally changed my mind. I don't think I've ever been as interested in an offensive line group ever. I never enjoy watching offensive linemen very much. I love this group. Like, I am borderline obsessed with how much I like some of these guys now. So I have got, like, not even including Joel, who I think most people would have as the blue chip tackle. I have 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 guys that I wouldn't be that annoyed with at 22, which is pretty extraordinary. Now, I'm not saying that all of them. I've got like 2 tiers. So my top tier are like Fashanu, JC Latham. If I'm pronouncing all these wrong, please tell me. Troy Fasanu, Talisi Faraga, Amarius Mims. They're like I would take them at 22 guys. But then I've also got like your Graham Bartons, Jackson Powers-Johnson, Tyler Guyton, Jordan Morgan. I think they're even in play. So in terms of my favorite group, in terms of how I built this board, I really, 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 really want a tackle that can play guard. So I'm really looking for tackle guard versatility. Now, the problem is it's really hard to know who's going to play what coming out, because sometimes people play like left tackle in college and you're like, you're never going to be a tackle at the next level. So you're scouting their traits rather than their actual performances. So with that in mind, like, Fashanu's interesting because he's my second guy, but he's probably not somebody who I think would play guard, but he's just so good at tackle, I think I consider it. But that's where I have JC Latham as maybe my next guy. 6'5", 340 pounds, big for a tackle in terms of size, but he has played it, and I think he can play it, but also like a bit of a mauler, like an extremely good run blocker, only 20 years old, very, very fluid, very coordinated, looks like he could easily start a guard on day one. But here's what's important for me is if I'm taking a guard on day one, I don't mind it, but I need them to be able to take over from Lane Johnson in 2 or 3 years. So I'm almost And similarly, ideally, I'd like it where if Lane Johnson was to get injured, you could potentially shift him there now, or Malata. I almost want someone that covers 5 positions, if that makes sense, which is really not center, but guard tackle versatility, which is really, really hard to see. So I have JC Latham as like a first round target at 22, and he's like my next guy up. I'm also interested in the TFs, Troy Fatanu and Talise Faraga. I don't know how you feel about those guys, but again, they're possibly guys that could play both. I think Faraga might be a little limited as a tackle, but I think he could do it, even though his range maybe isn't there. I think he tested really well. He's 6'5", so he's got decent length. I think he could play there as well. Fatanu, again, maybe a little bit more inconsistent than the others. But again, I think he can possibly play guard and tackle. So I think they're like my 4. And then the other one I have to mention, because I've never seen anyone like him, Shane, is what on earth is Amarius Mims on tape? Like, who is this guy? He's played 8 games and he's an absolute freak. Like, he is a freak in how he moves. Just the traits are off the charts. Like 8 starts is ridiculous to have in the first round. And that's why I have him below the other guys, but in the same tier, because I just think he's risky in terms of, you can't tell me there's no risk there. I don't care how good the traits are. He's just not played. So of course there are risks. He's injured. He's raw. He's injured a lot, I should say. But I wrote down this comparison, Shane. I put the words, he looks like Jason Peters at times, which is something I don't say very often when scouting college tackle prospects. What would be interesting is he's 6'7", which is so long for a guard. But could he do it? 340 pounds if you had to play him there for a couple of years. So what do you think about pick 22? Because I think on the offensive line, actually, it's quite, I know I've waffled there about massive. I said I'm obsessed with this offensive line group, so apologies. But I really only have it as other positions at 22 as in terms of offense as Brian Thomas or the offensive line. And I love all the guys in different reasons. Is there anyone else that I'm missing? And what are your opinions on the offensive line as I've sort of laid them out there? Anything you disagree with? Anything you agree with? What's your rankings in comparison, for example?
Yeah, I'll circle back to the first one you mentioned, which was AD Mitchell. He's actually my wide receiver 9. So I wouldn't be thrilled on AD Mitchell in the first round. Honestly, I don't think receivers really much in play in the first round, partially because I think there's a tier drop off, and partially because there are so many guys that are going to be there on day 2 at wide receiver. Now, maybe you get a late run on wide receivers. I don't know, but offensive line is interesting. I was very anti take an offensive lineman before Jason Kelce retired. Now that he retired, I'm okay with drafting a lineman, but he has to play. You cannot draft a right tackle only player to replace Lane Johnson. Like, if you draft somebody, he has to play guard. And it's not always so easy as just saying we're going to kick him inside. So you mentioned JC Latham. JC Latham played right guard as a freshman at Alabama before he kicked out to right tackle. And he's the number 12 overall player on my big board. So
there we go.
I like JC Latham a lot. Tremendous in the rushing game. He gets caught out at times by pass rushers, especially with like inside counter moves, which isn't as big of a deal if you've got him kicked inside early on in his career. And so that's a possibility. Some of the other guys that you mentioned, Amarius Mims is just, he's like a freak. Like you said, I don't know if you ever played like Madden a lot, but I would go in to create a player. And I always thought it was fun to just create like an offensive line that was all like 7 feet, 400 pounds and give him like 99 speed. And that's basically Amarius Mims. He's just huge, a 9.59 relative athletic score. Now, he doesn't have a lot of experience. He's only played 638 snaps across 3 years, started 8 games. He has a sky-high ceiling. Like, if he hits, he might be a Hall of Famer. He also might bust completely, or it might take him a while to get there. A team like the Eagles could bring him along slowly. However, I'm not sure about a guy that big playing right guard. I could see that being a problematic fit inside. You mentioned Fuega and Troy Fountainu, and you talked about almost wanting a guy that could play all 5 positions.
Yeah, maybe not. Sorry, maybe not 5. Maybe ignore center in the first round. Let's put him out of the way for the first round. But yeah, guard, tackle, and I guess if you could play guard, you could play center to an extent. So yeah, you know what I mean, don't you? Yeah. To
me, that's Graham Barton. So Graham Barton out of Duke is really interesting. He was a 3-star recruit. He's got 39 career starts. 5 of them were at center as a freshman, and the rest have been at left tackle. But he's small, and he's almost certainly being viewed as an interior offensive lineman who could play all 3 positions by teams. But he does have that background at tackle, which makes you think he could probably do it. And he's an interesting guy to me. And I'm not opposed to drafting just an interior offensive lineman in the first round. I think I value interior offensive line more than consensus. And so, he's actually not the only interior offensive lineman I have in my top 20, because I have Jackson Powers Johnson at number 16 overall. And I would be fine with either of those players. Jackson Powers Johnson was a center at Oregon. He played right tackle in the past at Oregon. He was a backup right guard at Oregon. And he dominated at offensive guard at the Senior Bowl. So I'm not opposed to just drafting a right guard as well. But honestly, at the end of the day, would rather see the Eagles go on the defensive side of the ball than go offensive line here. But we're not on the defensive podcast, so we can talk offensive linemen to our heart's content.
Yeah, we'll save defense for next week. As we mentioned, I have Graham Barton as Jackson Powers like the slight tier below, but I still have them as, so the way I rank them as rounds 1 to 2. I don't like doing players as round 1, round 2 because it's such a big gap. So Graham Barton, by the way, had 9.99 RAS score. Like, okay, absurd. It's funny when you were talking about Graham Barton, because you literally described him the exact way I said. So in my weaknesses, I have has never actually played guard in the last 3 years. He's just played left tackle. And I described him in my summary as Barton is another great prospect who has the athleticism and technique to potentially play all 5 spots. However, he probably lacks the movement and arm length to be a quality tackle, so will probably be kicked interior. And I think when you look at the Eagles as a whole under Howie Roseman, they normally like their long, freakish tackles. I don't know if they want like a short-armed guard tackle guy playing there. We have seen it in the past. I don't know what Driscoll's arm length is like. Jack Driscoll, but he strikes me as someone that's not like your rangy freak, but that's more of a backup. Tyler Steen's quite long as well. So I said that I would take Barton in the first. Personally, I said I said he'd probably not rather, if I had to choose, take him at 22. Jackson Power, I'm lower than others on, and again, I like him. He's like my offensive line, 6? I still have him as a grade 1 or 2, but for a very similar reason. So I'm just scrolling to my notes here on Jackson Power Johnson. I said the same thing. He's a strong man who's probably going to be a guard. I don't think he's got tackle versatility, and because of that, the way I've ranked them personally is I've pushed them down. In the first round, I don't think I just want the guard, and I don't know what's going to happen with Lane Johnson. I mean, he could play 3 more years, who knows? But ideally, I want someone to back up at both. However, I'm also not totally sold on Tyler Steen at guard. So if they wanted just to go nuts and just take a great offensive lineman who can make them an extremely good run blocking unit, then why the hell not? Like, why not? And there are other names I've got later on as well. Offensive line, but for 22, the guys you've mentioned and the guys I've mentioned there are probably the only ones. The only other guy I have who I want to throw out there is I would circle his name because I think the Eagles are going to like Jordan Morgan a lot. I think this is a Howie Roseman tackle all over. 9.2 RAS, intelligent, strong hands, long, strong in space, foot quickness, like speed score at the combine was ridiculous. The only issue he's got, Jordan Morgan, is his arm length is under 33. But that makes him interesting to me because he's played left tackle for 3 years, but maybe doesn't have the arm length for it. But that mean like the Eagles might see Jordan Morgan as like, well, this could be perfect because Stoutland's going to love him because he's so explosive. Yet he might not be a tackle, but he could be a tackle. I wouldn't take him at 22, personally, but I think he's the kind of guy that like the Eagles are going to like in terms of they could work with him there. There's quite a lot of work that could be done with him. I still think it's too early for me though. In that particular spot, I think the one name that if I was an Eagles fan, I would like circle because I would not be surprised at all if like he's extremely high on how he's balled is Tyler Guyton. Again,
that would be one of the offensive line picks that would make me the most upset.
See, interesting. All right, let's discuss him then, because I think the Eagles are going to love him.
I
I think they're
think
going to
I
love him.
think they do love him, and I just don't want him to be your first round pick.
So let's say I'll give you the counter. So I said in my notes, I mean, he's a former H-back, so you're talking about ridiculous athleticism, second level, like movement skills, elite arm length, athleticism, fluidity, done. Like top. I had him in my tier below, as I mentioned. So I'm sort of with you, and I basically said I think he's too raw for pick 22. So I agree with you there. I said, but I don't see many other guys who move like Guyton and win in space like he does. Stoutland's going to absolutely love him. Can he play guard? We'll see at 6'7", 322. But I literally put, I bet the Eagles have this guy extremely high on their board. I would probably rather him in the second. And the reasons why was I said, apparently at the Senior Bowl, we had some problems based on what I read. He loses balance at times in pass protections. Like when you have to redirect, and for people listening, like what does that really mean? Like you get knocked off balance. An offensive line, maybe a defensive lineman maybe ball rushes you, and you sort of get jolted a little bit, and you've got to then redirect. When he did that, he struggled with his balance when I noticed on film, which meant he ended up like on the floor or sort of being moved quite easily. And he's only played 1 year as a starter. And I think that's where that technique issue is a problem. But that's why I think the Eagles are going to love him, Shane, because I think he's raw. I think he's just a ridiculous athlete that you can blend into the way you want to play. So I would not be shocked at all if Guyton is the guy. He would not be my choice. He is my offensive. I don't rank tackle and guard center separately because I don't really understand why. Because I think they can all play everywhere half the time. It depends on team and scheme and specific fit. I have him as like my 9th offensive lineman. He wouldn't be my first choice at 22, but Eagles fans keep an eye on him because he just looks like a Howie Roseman pick to me.
Yeah. Just to circle back real quick, Jack Driscoll's arms are 1/8 of an inch longer than Graham Barton's. So just comparison there. But
interesting.
Jordan Morgan, I'll start with Jordan Morgan quickly. He is my 11th ranked offensive lineman. I've got him at 38 overall. And my scheme fit for him. I said he might project best to offensive guard, but he never played there. And so I'm right with you there. I don't think he's a tackle in the league. I think he's a guard. That's why I think he should be pushed down boards a little bit. Second round, I'd be fine with him. I wouldn't love it in the first. On Tyler Guyton, and he plays at Oklahoma, and I'm an Oklahoma fan. And so usually I stand for my Oklahoma guys. The thing with Tyler Guyton, and I like him as a player. He's 27 overall on my big board. I just don't like him as a fit for the Eagles. So he was a 3-star recruit as a defensive end, and he did not play tackle until he got to college. So he's raw at the position. Elite athleticism. You can notice, you can see technical improvements from 2022 to 2023 on his film. And so that's good. He's improving, but he's a really unrefined player. His footwork's all over the place. His leverage and hand strikes are inconsistent. And so my fear is, one, he's huge. And so putting that huge guy at right guard, that's a little problematic. But two, this isn't taking a JC Latham who's played a ton of football and saying, you're going to play right guard for us for a year or two and then kick out to tackle. This is taking a guy who's just learning how to play right tackle and saying, learn how to play a different position, even though you don't know right tackle very well yet. And then we're going to move you back to right tackle in a couple years. I just think you need a player that is more well-established than Tyler Guyton if you're going to try to do that with him. He's a great fit, honestly, if you didn't have other needs to take and sit him for a year behind Lane Johnson and him be your starter in 2025. But I don't think Lane Johnson is that close to retirement. And I just think the Eagles have bigger needs. So I like the player. I think he should be brought along a little bit slowly. And I don't think switching in positions fits into that bringing him along a little slowly category.
So this is why we work well together, Shane, because you bring the voice of reason and you've convinced me. I'm almost tempted, and I've already published my article for BGN about my draft rankings, and now I want to move him down a tier. So you annoyed me. But what's great is that I just watch film and just stare at these players in awe and watch them move and think, oh my goodness. And then you bring reason. Actually, if he's a 1-year starter at the position, maybe teaching him to play guard and then telling him a year later to replace Lane Johnson, or 2 years later, or 3 years later, or 4 years later, maybe doesn't work as well. So this is why I like it, because I just stare at these guys on film and just go, wow. And then you go, hang on a minute. How do they actually, does this work? And yeah, you've sort of convinced me a little bit. Is there anyone else? Because I'll be honest, I haven't got a huge amount others except for offensive line at that position on offense. So is there any other names you wanted to throw out there before we make this the offensive line podcast? I don't have as many in rounds 2 and 3. Don't worry, everyone.
Yeah, we'll get into day 2 here. A couple of comments we've got from Old Mints on Twitch. Wants to know about our top 5 punters in the draft. Yeah. Johnny, we totally forgot to put in a day 3 special teams target. So
yeah, I'm the kind of guy who would leave a fantasy league if they introduce kickers. So that's not one for me.
And then Lance on Twitter says, y'all are the best. Good to see you back at it with your podcast. Any way you could get BLG on one of your podcasts?
I will make sure to send that to him after this, Lance.
Yes,
I'm sure
tuned.
He'll enjoy that.
Stay tuned. Maybe we can work something out post draft. So let's kick it over into day 2, and we can talk. Maybe you're trading out of the first round, so early second round, maybe 50-53, maybe a day 3 guy. Because honestly, the Eagles don't have a day 3 pick, and again, that would. Our trade up for Brock Bowers scenario gets a little more difficult by not having a 3rd round pick. But I could also see the Eagles moving back in the first round to pick up a 3rd. I could see them picking at 22 and then trading one of 50 or 53 to move back and pick up a 3rd, because that's a big gap in not having picks from 53 all the way to 120. So we'll try to cover some prospects that we think fit in that trade up. Or excuse me, that trade down scenario, maybe some 3rd round guys. So Johnny, who's a guy that sticks out to you, whether it be at 50, 53, or maybe even a little bit later, that you would like to see the Eagles target?
Well, Shane, you know me too well by now. You can't ask me for a guy that I would like. Have you never podcasted with me before? I will throw out about 50 names if you give me the opportunity. One guy won't cut it.
Give me 2. I'll give you 2.
2? No, I refuse. It's on my podcast now. I'm refusing to do that. I'll tell you what, I'll give you. I was going to say I'll give you 5. I won't give you. I'll give you my top round 2 targets on offense. I have way more on defense, by the way, way more for this particular round. So in terms of my best guys at the top of round 2, so I basically rank them as rounds 2 and then rounds 2 to 3. So I'll give you my rounds 2 guy on offense. I haven't got many actually. I've already given you AD Mitchell as my late 1-2. The other receivers I consider there are Xavier Worthy or Ladd McConkey. I feel like most people know a lot about the receivers already. I rank Worthy above Ladd McConkey, but remember, I'm doing this from an Eagles perspective. So I'm doing that because I want explosive athletes who need minimal touches. I think Ladd McConkey is a fantastic player who could be a 1st round pick in some schemes. But for the Eagles, I think he's a volume player, and maybe that's not what they need. I think Xavier Worthy is the fun pick because everyone knows he ran a 4.2 140, but I don't think he's like a John Ross, just fly down the field speedster. He's not good in contested situations. He does struggle to catch the ball, and he's skinny and he's small, but he's just so twitchy. He's explosive yards after the catch. He plays hard on every snap. What I love about Xavier Worthy is he tries to block, even though he sometimes looks like me would look like on a football field trying to block, but he gives it his all, and I love that. So I don't think he'll be there, but he would be my explosive, fun, offensive target. I'll give you 3 random names as well. I think I'm higher on these guys than people I've seen. If they want to go pure guard, we're going back to offensive line again. Sorry, I'll be quick. If you want to just go pure offensive line guard, I think, whether I'm pronouncing this right, you got Cooper Beebe or Bebe.
Cooper Beebe.
Cooper Beebe. There you go. I got it wrong twice, which is impressive. He's just your straight up day 1, in my opinion, starter, right guard, good athlete. And the other one I have like that is Christian Haynes, who I also like as sort of an immediate day 1 starter. Haynes I have below him because athletic testing, he doesn't look as good as Beebe, in my opinion. He's also 24 on draft day, Christian Haynes. But Christian Haynes, 49 straight starts in a row. Great athlete, played right guard for the last 3 years. Plug and play, in my opinion, day 1. And Cooper Beebe, guess what? 45 career starts in a row. Right guard, nailed on, really good athletic testing, strong lineman, good awareness, good at the second level. That's why I have Beebe slightly above. And if you want a totally random name that everyone will hate with a passion, but I'll give it to you anyway. I will not pronounce his name correctly, but Kingsley
Suamatia.
Suramatia, there you go. Just athletic freak, raw tackle. If the Eagles want to take a work in progress, it's going to annoy the hell out of everyone. He is someone that maybe the second's a little rich for me, but oh my goodness, he is a project that I think the Eagles could develop seriously well. There's a few names for you that I have at like the top of the second, and then I'll throw it back to you and I'll get into my like late two guys, should we say. Anyone I've missed, or what do you think? And well, I'm sure there's people that I've missed, but also what do you think about those guys that I have mentioned? And give me some names of your own as well.
Yeah, let's talk. So let's zero in on Lad McConkey because he's a guy that I really like. He's 34 on my big board. He's never produced well, right? Never a big producer at Georgia. 762 yards in 2022 is his career best, which it's worth pointing out that led his team among wide receivers. Obviously, Brock Bowers stealing a lot of targets. And then he missed the first month of the season this year with a back injury and then missed 2 more games with an ankle injury. So that explains some of his lower production this year, which maybe he's injury prone. I don't know. I just think I think he's one of the best route runners in this class. And so when I envision plugging somebody in, alongside A.J. Brown, who's your deep ball threat, and Devontae Smith, who's such a silky smooth route runner, putting Lad McConkey in the slot next to Devontae Smith, like the possibilities are endless. So I really like the idea of Lad McConkey. I want to ask your opinion about another guy. And somebody you didn't mention is wide receiver Xavier Legette from South Carolina. What did you think about Legette?
Right. Can I just, I'll tell you, I'll do 2 in 1. Firstly, McConkey, I love him. Like, I think he's super twitchy, hard to, basically impossible to cover in man cover at time. Like, no wasted motion, short area burst, quickness, as good as it gets. I basically want to go on a little bit of a tangent here, which I like to do about if the Eagles are going to take a receiver, I don't want, and then I say don't want, maybe in the 3rd round I do, in the 2nd, a slot only guy. Now, I think the Eagles have to make a decision. Can Lad McConkey play out wide? Because one of the things teams don't like, people think of like the Wes Welkers of the world when they think of slot receivers. Teams don't play like that anymore. Like some do, but most teams don't. Go and watch the Eagles every week. Devontae Smith's in the slot. AJ Brown's in the slot. Tight ends are in the slot. And you can't do that if you have a guy on your team who just stands in the slot every snap. Then he becomes a bit part player, which is fine if you're taking him in the 3rd round. But I don't want a bit part player in the 2nd. So my big question for Lad McConkey is he has to be a movement receiver, not a slot only. And for listeners, I think that's a really big distinction to think about when thinking about the receivers these days. If there's someone that can just stand in the slot and literally can't take a snap outside, that's a problem for me. Because basically that means, well, what if we want to put AJ Brown in the slot? Who's lining up on the outside then? What if we want to put Devontae Smith on the slot? Who's lining up on the outside? I want my receivers to be fluid. So McConkey, the big question for me is, can he do it, or is he a slot only guy? I happen to think he is not a slot only guy. I think he's a movement receiver. The reason why I haven't taken him maybe earlier, I've given him a round 1 to 2 grade, just because I think he's a bit more of a volume player. Dare I say, everyone's going to say Cooper Kupp for obvious reasons. And I think, do you want a volume player in this offense? Me personally, I want explosive talent first, because I think they've already got volume players on their team that they need to target. Xavier Legette, right. I am guessing, using my detective skills, that you really like him because you've asked me to mention him in the 2nd round. So I'm going to just assume that you're a big fan. I'm terrified of him. I am terrified. So I'll tell you why. I have him ranked towards the top of my rounds 2 to 3.
I know why, but go ahead.
Well, no, I don't know if you do, because my problem is, Shane, I love him and I love players like this. This is my guy. We spoke about this. Long, athletic, 6'1", 220, 9.92 RAS, big frame, wins in contested situations, strong speed, creates yards after catch. This is my guy. I compared him to Kevin White. I threw it out there as I fall obsessed. My biggest draft bust ever, I think, was Jalen Strong. And we're going back a bit now because I've done this for a while. I loved Jalen Strong coming out. I loved Kevin White coming out. And I've tried not to become obsessed with these freakishly athletic, long, raw guys. And I'm worried that Legette is a bit like that. 1 season worth of production. There's a lack of nuance to his game. I think his footwork needs work. I think he's more straight line than elusive. And I think that's been a big problem with receivers that have busted in the past. However, then I look at someone like DK Metcalf and be like, well, he could be DK Metcalf, vertical, straight line, just win on a few routes on the outside. So I literally, and this is no word of a lie, in my note, Shane, I put, oh no, this is the exact profile I have wrongly fallen for multiple times. A big, fast, vertical threat who lacks polish and nuance with his route running, but he is the type of guy who I have seen bust. However, I'd love an extra explosive weapon on this team. He could back up and learn from AJ Brown. I'm a sucker for this kind of player. I can't help it. That's exactly what I've written in my notes. So
I am too.
I've pushed him down to my tier 4. So like my round 2 to 3 tier. Hand on heart, I want to put him in my tier 3. I want him to be a second round pick, but I almost am covering myself because I know how many times I've fallen for players like this. I'm guessing. And by the way, I said in my own notes, I'd still take him in the second round. Like I said it quite clearly that I would. I'm guessing you have him the tier above me. And I'm guessing everything I said you probably agree with. You're just willing to bank on the athleticism maybe more because I'm scarred by past experiences. John's comment, I've been hurt before. Yeah, basically that's it. I have been hurt by this type of player. And because of that, I am being maybe harsher on Leggett than I actually believe in my heart.
Yeah, so he's the number 35 player on my big board. And it's just 221 pounds, doesn't move like that, runs a sub 4.40. And like, I'm very well aware of this type of player. But I mean, I literally said in my notes, he's AJ Brown or he's JJ Arcega-Whiteside. Like, and I loved both of those guys. A couple of years ago, Trillon Burks was my wide receiver 1 in that draft class.
Burks was my one. Just like to point out, I hated JJ Arcega-Whiteside, so I got one right.
Okay.
But I love Treylon Burks. So yeah. We've been.
So I have a tendency to like these huge, athletic, contested catch guys, and sometimes you wonder why are so many of the catches contested. It's because they don't separate very well, and that's certainly the case with Leggett. He did not top 200 yards until he was a fifth-year senior. He was mainly a screen guy in 2022. He wasn't really wide receiver 1 until this year. He didn't really have, the best quarterback play. He's playing with Spencer Rattler in 2023. And so that's a guy that's going to get drafted, not on day 1, maybe not on day 2, but he's going to get drafted. And so, the part of you that wants to argue for Leggett would say it was situational and he wasn't used right. But this is the type of guy that comes into the league and kicks the door down and is incredible, or he busts completely. And it could go either way, but it's hard for me not to bet on that size moving that fast. And so I do like Leggett, and he terrifies me at the same time. But I was going to see what your take was on him. 2 other guys I'll throw at you. Tight end Jatavian Sanders out of Texas. We've hashed out tight end early on in this podcast, talking about Brock Bowers. Jatavian Sanders is number 49 on my big board overall. He is not a good blocker, but he's a good receiving tight end. So he's not necessarily the best fit in terms of adequately running 12 personnel like we talked about, because I don't think he's a good blocker at all. But he is a little bit intriguing as a pass catcher, depending on, where the Eagles go in the first round and who's on the board. I wouldn't hate a JT Sanders pick. And then the other guy that I'll throw at you is interior offensive lineman Zach Frazier out of West Virginia. Now, the thing about Zach Frazier is he's a center. He played 2,600 snaps at center, but he does have 470 at left guard. Now, the Eagles would need a right guard, unless they were going to draft him to be a center and keep Cam Jurgens at right guard. But I'm sort of the opinion, once you've played, center and left guard, you could probably get into right guard as well. He's a guy that I view him more as a center, so it really only makes sense to me if you're going to keep Jurgens at right guard, and I don't necessarily think Jurgens was great at right guard, but Frazier is a guy that I like. I've got a soft spot for interior offensive line guys, and I think Frazier is a solid player. Maybe not the best fit with the Eagles, but I do think it's worth mentioning because of how much the Eagles like to invest in the trenches.
Just before I discuss them, Shane, can you just confirm then you would take Sanders, and who was the other tight end?
Bowers?
No, sorry. Didn't you mention another tight end there, or was I going mad? I thought you mentioned Sanders and one more.
No. Sanders and then Zach Frazier is a center from West Virginia.
I've watched Frazier. So you would take Sanders and Frazier in round 2, yeah?
Potentially. I've got second round grades on them. For the Eagles specifically, they're probably a little further down the board than overall. But yeah, I have second round grades on both guys.
Right, we're going to disagree on maybe not on both. Funny enough, right, let's start with Zach Frazier because we are so in sync. Honestly, if people listening, me and Shane have not spoke about any prospects. Like, we do not talk about this kind of thing off air. We like to hash it out on the show. So I have Zach Frazier as round 2 to 3. I said basically I would only take him in the second if they think he can play guard. I am not picking him as a center. It's madness to me. I've watched Cam Jurgens in preseason fly around and hit everything at center. I mean, I've watched him play averagely at right guard in the season, and I'm like, no. I've seen Jason Kelce say he's the next center. Cam Jurgens is the Eagles center. I'm not drafting a center. So Zach Frazier wouldn't even be on my board if he plays center only, honestly. However, despite what you've said, I couldn't agree with you more. I said he's an excellent prospect, high IQ, competitive toughness, strong frame, good anchor, lacks a little bit of athleticism, but it's not the end of the world. But he's only played center. So I said I have a round 2 grade on him. I expect him to go in the first 2 rounds, but I'm not taking him. I said the only reason I would take him in the second, and the only reason is if you think he can play guard. I just don't understand why you take a center in the second round and push Cam Jurgens. That makes no sense to me. I really don't agree with you on Jatavian Sanders either. I have him as a third round. I say I don't agree with you. That's harsh. You have him as a second, I'm a third. We're hardly like 3 rounds apart here. I have in the third round. Misses too many blocks for me. I think he's raw. I think he's a little sluggish. He's a little clunky. He's a little light still. I didn't like the testing too much. I think he came out and tested again at his pro day and actually did a lot better. I think his initial testing was pretty poor. And now he's going up to an 8 RAS, whereas I think he was sitting at lower.
He was at a 5.65 after.
Yeah, that's what I saw him as. So did he go up because of his
pro day?
Yeah, and that scares me. Like a 5 combine and then going up to an 8 from your pro day. That terrifies me. Like he had a vertical of a 30. Like what is that about? And I'm not sure I'm that far behind. He's basically he's a fast guy. He's explosive. He's physical, good hands, catches everything. But not for me in the second. Not for me in the second. I want a better player. I think there's so much talent on the other sides of the ball. I wouldn't have him until you're obviously higher on him than me. Me personally, there's so much talent. I think at edge, I think possibly even like safety, linebacker, corner.
Hey, you're not allowed to mention defensive positions right now.
All right. But I'm just saying he is way down. So Frazier, no, unless he's playing guard. I'm not taking him to play center. And Jatavian Sanders, no. Not in round 2. He's strongly in a round 3 category for me.
All right. Well, do we want to mention some round 3 guys? Because I think there's a good possibility that the Eagles end up with a 3rd round pick, whether it be moving back in the first, moving off of one of these 2nd round picks. So throw me a couple of names that you like in the 3rd round, and I'll tell you where I'm at on them.
Shane, you still haven't learned. How many times we podcasted together, people that are listening? 25 times. I'm not throwing you a couple of names. I've been grinding too hard to throw you a couple of names.
So I'll give you a couple just means like more than 2, right?
I mean, it
open to interpretation.
Right. Do you know what? Because I'm actually going to go on for too long. It's 48 minutes. We'll break them down into 2 sections. Let me do 2 sections because I know I still want to talk about people. Let's do like my round 2 to 3 guys that I haven't mentioned. And then I'll give you like my pure round 3 guys. Because I think there is a difference. I think there is a difference between guys that like you trade down for in the second, you trade up for in the third, or like your back end of day 3, your comp picks, basically a round 4 pick. I think there is a difference. So the guys that I like in that like 2 late round, you mentioned Xavier Leggett. He's one of them. Ricky Pearsall, I really like, receiver. Outside, inside versatility, explosive. Roman Wilson, I think as well. I think in terms of like crossing routes that I think we'll run a lot with, I really like him. Troy Franklin's a bit of a wild card for me. I've moved him up. I've had him tier 1. I've had him tier 2. I've had him tier 3. I've now got him in that round as well. Terrifies me a little bit because of how like light he is, but also he fits the bill for me of if the Eagles want to get explosive with minimal touches, he is the guy. I did mention Zach Fraser here as well. I also mentioned Patrick Paul, another offensive lineman. If the Eagles want to go mad again, 6'7", 331 pounds, 9.75 RAS. These offensive linemen, Shane, their RAS testing is off the charts. 44 starts at left tackle, so he's another guy, but I have him in a tier below because I think he might need a lot of work if you want to get him to play right tackle or right guard. But just as a project, I think he's awesome. There's not that many guys that I love on offense at the back end of round 2, though. I have a lot more for round 3. So before we get into round 3, because I think that's a much more interesting round, I know the Eagles don't have a third-round pick, but they could easily trade up or trade down, so they end up with a third-round pick. Out of those guys I mentioned there, maybe Franklin, Pierce, or Roman Wilson. I've got Keon Coleman in that tier, but he's never going there. He's going way earlier. So I've not even mentioned him because, like, what's the point? Keon Coleman's going to go top 50, I imagine. So out of those guys,
he's 31 overall on my big board.
Yeah, that's too early. Like, you're getting this hype, Shane, about the big guys that can catch. Look at me, you're being sensible and picking the sensible guys, and you going like down my road and just picking the athletes that can win in jump ball situations.
I know.
Out of those guys, Ricky Pearsall, who I mentioned I would take there, Pearsall, Rowan Wilson, Franklin. I've got no running backs in this tier. I don't think it makes any sense for the Eagles to take a running back in the second round. No quarterback. I don't have a tight end. So actually, I'm pretty limited. So what do you think about those guys? And then I'll give you some more third round picks after.
Roman Wilson is a guy that I really like. He's 52 overall on my board. I think you get into the slot only discussion we had before because I do think he is slot limited. I don't think you're going to put him out as a Z receiver. Maybe Kellen Moore gets creative, and you can use motion to get him a free release, but he's going to struggle to deal with press at times. And so I don't think he's a guy that you'd regularly want on the line of scrimmage. You're going to have him in the slot or have him moving. But I also think he's one of the best route runners in the class. He's always open. He's got great hands, only had 5 drops in his entire collegiate career. And he does a really good job, I think, of sitting down in soft spots in zone coverage, which is really useful when you think about the Eagles struggling against the blitz and the zone blitzes that teams are running now. And you've got a guy that you can trust to do those sight adjust routes off the front of the play. And, hey, my guy's coming. I'm going to sit down. Is this man or zone? Do I need to break in or out? Do I need to just sit here? And if you can get a guy like that, that's such an intelligent player that sees the field so well and is so fluid, and you can get him on the same page with Jalen Hurts, I think you could help a lot in those sort of situations. So I like Roman Wilson. Our comments earlier about drafting a slot only player notwithstanding, he's a guy that I really like as a fit there.
Awesome. Before I give you some names, because I think round 3 is really interesting. What about Ricky Pearsall? He seems to be a little bit all over the map. I've seen some people suggest he could go as high as like the first. I know the Underdog Fantasy guys absolutely love him. I have him as like the top of that second tier behind, or no, that's a lie. He's slightly behind Leggett for me. But I really liked him because I think he's explosive. I think he can play outside, inside versatility. Really good route runner, really good speed, reliable hands. Production's a concern. I worry about, is he only going to be in the slot? But I compared him to like sort of like a Tyler Lockett-ish type player. What did you think? Sorry, that was a different guy. So I was looking at my notes. I Ricky Pearsall, though, similar. I actually mentioned, could he be like the Khalil Shakir for Buffalo, who's done quite well? Or could he even be one of those guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who just ends up being far better than they were at the next level? So what do you think about Ricky Pearsall?
Yeah, I think Pearsall's intriguing. I have him below Roman Wilson. He's kind of like in my second to third round sort of area. So I think he's kind of appropriately placed there. I've got him in the late 50s overall. He's an intriguing fit with the Eagles as well. There's just so many receivers, and that's where I'm saying, like, every team that's run intelligently should be looking at receiver sometime on day 2. And, unless you take Brock Bowers in the first round, I expect the Eagles to do so as well.
Right. Let's end this with me giving you some round 3 names, because I think round 3 is fascinating. I've just read that the Eagles have invited Marshawn Lloyd into one of their 30 visits in the building, and I'm all for it, Shane. I love this round 3 running back. I know they've got Barkley. I know they don't need another one, but I want to give Barkley 99% of the snaps anyway. He's not paid that highly. I want to wear him down and in certain games use him 100% of the time, but give me explosive second backs who can take 7 to 10 carries. My absolute favorites in this one, Trey Benson, just an explosive freak compared him to Todd Gurley. I think he'd be awesome if you want to have like a little bit more of a hammer. Jalen Wright, again, stupidly explosive. Tested extremely well, like 7.4 yards per attempt last year is ridiculous. He's not going to be that, but I compared him to like a Travis Etienne, just 21 years old, really, really, really fast, explosive. The guy that really interests me on day 3 as well, or sorry, round 3, I think he could go round 4 is Marshawn Lloyd, the guy who blew up the combine, but 5'9", 220 is ridiculous. The explosiveness just jumps out off the screen when you see him. Massive ball security and vision issues that it could be problems, but I compared him to like an Aaron Jones style. I think running back around 3 is a really interesting thing for the Eagles. I think they could consider it. I think it'd be much, much more sensible in round 4, saying all this, but I think they're just guys I wanted to throw out there. Tight end, I've got a name I wanted to mention, Ben Sinnott. Really, really like him as a fullback tight end hybrid. And if the Eagles want to do something like that under Kellen Moore, which I think is really possible, I think he's absolutely in play. 6'3", 250, 9.92 RAS, a little bit of a chest piece, short area quickness, burst, willing blocker, get yards after the catch. He's not an overall tight end. The ceiling isn't there. The size isn't there. The vertical long speed isn't there. But if the Eagles want to add a fullback tight end hybrid, then I think he is somebody that they should look to add. And I think he could be around 3. But Shane, my absolute guy, like my guy, if you want to say who is like my person in this draft I've fallen in love with, and it's hilarious because I've laughed at you all the time for picking receivers based on traits. And I am taking a receiver purely on traits, and a receiver who is based on traits, and he didn't even test very well, which is great. And he's raw. There's a total lack of sort of polish to his game. He needs so much work. I'm not sure if he's fast enough to do the role I want him to do. I'm not sure if he can play outside. He played 92% of his snaps in the slot last year. But Shane, Malachi Corley is just all over. Give me explosive 3rd round limited touch player. He basically doesn't run a route. He basically is a manufactured touch guy. He's basically 5 years ago, he's a running back, not receiver. And I believe I even read somewhere that basically coaches told him to go to running back receiver, because there's more money in it. He is the definition of a running back at receiver. Just give him the ball. How many times last year, Shane, did we see bubble screens going to like nobody and it just be a complete waste of time? Just stick him out there for 20, 25 snaps a game. Give him a few snaps of running back. Put him out wide. Good catch radius. Just stupidly good in the short game. His average depth of target last year, Shane, was 6.1, which is amazing. Like 6.1 is there's nothing down the field. I don't even think he tested that well, which is why I'm laughing about myself picking a traits guy who doesn't even have particularly good like testing. He's not even like a freak athlete. He's just the guy. Like he's my round 3. Go and get him in round 3. Chest piece, screens, reverses, yards after the catch. Throw him short stuff. Give him manufactured touches. Kellen Moore, what do we know he likes to do, Shane? We saw it on tape. Jet sweeps. Mm-hmm. He wants a receiver in the slot who can do that stuff. Don't give AJ Brown jet sweeps. Don't give Devontae Smith. Don't get them whacked by linebackers running over the middle. Like, leave them running routes. Go and get like a budget Deebo Samuel, Rondale Moore style, sort of like powerhouse of a receiver. He's not the best fit here. If I'm playing Dynasty, which I do, I'm not taking him anywhere near where I have him ranked here. But for like an Eagles fit, for what I think the Eagles offense needs, it doesn't take a top 50 or top maybe not like 80 pick back end of day 3. He is my guy. Like he is absolutely my guy. Now do you want to break my heart and tell me why you totally disagree with everything I've said? Or are you actually in a similar position?
No, I'm with you. I've got Malachi Corley sort of in that late 2nd, early 3rd sort of
area. Really? Okay. Love it. I think some people have got him way below. So that's good.
Yeah, I like Corley. He is 58 on my big board. So I like Corley, and I'm going to touch on, John said here on Twitter, definitely need another running back with Barkley's injury history. We need someone ahead of Kenny Gainwell. I'm going to give you my 2 favorite running backs in this draft because they haven't been mentioned yet. The first one is Jonathan Brooks out of Texas. I love Jonathan Brooks. Now, he has a major medical red flag, which I try not to take into account in my player evaluations because I don't have the medical information to make a decision there. I just try to look at what I see on the field. And I love Jonathan Brooks. He's a very sudden runner. He's got excellent stop-start ability. He's a plus as a receiver and as a pass blocker. Like, he can chip and release. You can leave him to pick up linebackers or defensive backs, which is obviously huge for the Eagles. I think he's got really good vision. He's got good balance, and he just explodes out of his cuts. But 2023 was his only year as a lead back, and he got injured. He tore his ACL in November, and he's going to come off that injury as a rookie. So you've got major questions about one, is he injury prone? And I'm not a big injury prone person, but when you talk about running backs and you talk about an ACL injury, it is something that's concerning. And he's got a slim frame. He's only 202 pounds, which is 20th percentile. So that's a concern for a guy that's coming off of an injury. So I love Jonathan Brooks' film. There's certainly some injury question marks there, though. But the other guy that I like, and I have him one spot ahead of Trey Benson on my big board, so they're right there. But it's Bucky Irving. Now, Bucky Irving didn't test well out of Oregon, and you're already shaking your head.
Shane, didn't test well is a polite way of putting it. He tested horrendously. But yeah, talk about him. Tell me why you like him, and I'll tell you why you're wrong.
You know who? So here's the thing. A couple of years ago, there was a running back named Kyron Williams that I absolutely loved. And I let his testing turn me off of him, and I dropped him dramatically. Kyron Williams was incredible for the Rams this year. So I've tried, like, he doesn't have like home run speed. You'll see him get run down from behind in the open field at times, but he is so explosive. Like, he's so shifty that it's that lateral agility. He hit a jump cut. I can't remember who it was now, what game it was that I was like, he hit a jump cut that made me stand up out of my chair. Like, he's an excellent receiver out of the backfield, and he can run actual routes, not just be a check down guy. And so if you're thinking about, you said you want an explosive guy, and I get that. And he doesn't have that home run speed. But if you want someone that can come in on plays where Barkley's out and you can still use him full, is running more than check down routes, he can make guys miss. I just think he's not as good of a pass blocker. He's probably always going to struggle as a pass blocker at his size, 9th percentile weight. But I do like Bucky Irving in the 3rd round. He's somebody I would be interested to watch play.
Yeah, I too like small, slow running backs who can't pass protect. Me too, Shane. You've sold me there. No, so actually, I want to
don't make me send you the clips. I will start sending you clips when we get off.
So I want to mention the 2 guys. So Jonathan Brooks, I didn't mention ironically because I have him in my tier 1. So I have 4 guys in my tier 1: Benson, Wright, Brooks, and Lloyd. And I mentioned 3 of them. I didn't mention Brooks, but he's the exact same. I like him a lot with you, like you. This is where I think making draft rankings for the Eagles is really interesting. So I literally have a spreadsheet in front of me, and I have Eagles rankings and I have dynasty rankings, and I have Jonathan Brooks as my RB1. So someone said to me in a vacuum, who do you think the best running back in the class is? It's Jonathan Brooks. The reason why I have Benson and Wright above them is I think, and this is just my opinion, they're a little bit more explosive in minimal touches. So I think Benson is just like a physical, like, freak. I think he ran like a 4.33 or whatever he ran. So he is like, I think Jonathan Brooks is a better running back. I think Jonathan Brooks is someone you want to give like 15 to 18 carries to, whereas I think the other 2 are maybe more chess pieces. I think I count Lloyd in that category. I'm laughing at you, Shane, but I'm actually not that dissimilar. I have Bucky Irving as my running back 5. Now, I have him in a massive tier. Like, for me, Irving, Corum, Tyrone, Tracy, Estime, Garendo, I'm all like, yeah, day 3, round 4, take any of them. I liked Bucky Irving's film. I like the prospect. I like the player. In fact, he was a guy that I had circled as he should be the Eagles' backup because that's what he's good at. Literally, look at my notes. Same as you. Lateral movement, change direction on a dime, elite speed, elite quickness, good hands in passing game. Fumble's not a concern. And I described them as like he's a change of pace back rather than the guy. He looks everything for the Eagles running back too. And I would have said round 3. Then he tested. And I struggle with it. Now, round 4, so day 3, fine. I can accept that. I think I will live with it. But like the testing's just like, it's so bad. Like, it wasn't even like a little bit bad. It was so poor. I think you look at the size and the pass protecting for me was a concern on tape as well. And then you look at, like, he didn't even test any agility, which I find a little bit odd on his original testing, but like the explosiveness, the speed, like a 4.58. Like, I don't want to change a base back who runs a 4.58. Like, that's just not what I'm interested in. The way I view the Eagles, if I want to change a base back, I'm basically saying, right, come in, have a few snaps here or there. Let's see if you can create something explosive. That's not what Bucky Irving tested like. So he's a classic case of film versus testing. At the moment, he would not fit in terms of this podcast as like a day 1 or 2 targets, because I wouldn't touch him on day 2 based on his testing. Day 3, go for it, but not on day 2. And to finish off, Shane, because I don't think I've got anyone else I want to actually mention, because I've mentioned everyone. I do have a few other receivers I'd throw out there for the people. Jermaine Burton, if he's not apparently an idiot off the field. Javon Baker, don't know if you watched him. Really like him. He's a target of mine, which I think I have higher than others on day 3. He just looks like he's got the athletic traits to succeed in the league. 6'1", 202, can play outside, good route runner, good in contested catches. I think he doesn't have the long speed to become a wide receiver 1, but like a Romeo Doubs type, like or Romeo Dobbs, I should say. That's good British pronunciation there. I actually had someone comment in the thing saying, do I ever say myself like route, like you also like route? Yes, all the time. I have to watch myself all the time, but I'm British. I will pronounce it the way I should do. But yes, I do want to say it all the time. So he's a guy to look out for. But to finish up, I think he's quite an interesting player. So where do you have, and you can mention any of the guys that I've mentioned there if you really want to, but where do you have Ben Sinnott? Do you share my appreciation for that fullback tight end hybrid role, or are you a little bit more out on him than I am?
Yeah, that's another type that I always fall for. I always fall for like the fullback tight end hybrid guy, and I feel like they never do anything in the league, but I always like him. He's 72 overall on my big board, which on the consensus big board, he's like 114. So you could say I'm quite high on him. And I think he's got really good athleticism. I mean, he had a 96th percentile 3-cone, 91st percentile shuttle, 94th percentile broad jump, a 9.72 relative athletic score. He lined up in the backfield, in line, in the slot at Kansas State. I really like him. 3rd round, I would love to see him as a guy that you can sort of move around as that tight end too. You could put him in, not that I think the Eagles are going to run a lot of I formation, but you could use him as a fullback. He struggles to separate at the top of routes. He's not the best route runner, but he's got pretty good long speed where he can threaten over routes and he can threaten up the seam. So I really like Ben Sinnott. He's one of my favorite, 3rd round type guys in the draft.
Maybe your mate Bucky Irving can hire his trainer before he decides to run again. I can't get over how, like, why did he test? Because I think testing's. I think we'd have a whole discussion, Shane. We do a post-draft podcast on the role of testing now, because everyone's testing well. Like, these guys are just testing better and better. So I think the training they're getting, the nutrition, probably like the preparation, it almost makes comparable testing from like 20 years ago sort of pointless now. I want to see like a new RAS basically of like the past 3 years only. And these guys have agents telling them what to do. Like, you get people like Cooper DeJean test not at agility drills. Again, I think deliberate. He must have done it with his training, Bucky Irving. Like, what was he doing? Like, just don't test. Just literally don't turn up. Do a Marvin Harrison. Be like, no, there's no way it could have gone worse. Like, he would have been better off just saying, I'm not testing. Watch the film. Because people don't test these days when they're that bad, when they've got good film, and he's got really good film. So like, I find him like a mystery. I'm going to read that he was injured at some point, but again, like, why did he do it? Because it was so poor. Right, we said we keep it under an hour. I said there's no chance. I was correct, because I knew how many names I wanted to throw out there. I don't think I have anyone else that I'm desperate to get out in day 1 or day 2. It's not all my board. Like, read the articles, check the tweets. You'll see some other guys I've got mentioned, but I feel like I've managed to pretty much throw out a number of names. All I would say is wait till defense, because I feel like that gets more interesting. For me, this is like such an offensive line heavy draft in day 1 or day 2. So I had to talk about them and get them off my chest. But I think, Shane, I've got everyone covered. I could have gone on a lot longer. I could have done half an hour with Trey Benson, but no one wants that. So is there anything else you wanted to throw out there? Anyone else you wanted my opinion on? Anyone that you have high that you wanted to know what I think about? or maybe we'll try and end it before the hour 15, definitely.
Yeah, no, I think that's good for me. So we wanted to give you guys some offensive targets on day 1 and day 2. As we said at the top, next week, we will be back in advance of the draft doing a top day 1 and day 2 targets on defense. We're working out the details to try to get you guys like a round 1 reaction show and then a full draft reaction show. So there's going to be a lot of content in the pipeline here. We've got over 500 of you guys watching live right now. So we really appreciate you guys coming out for this first live episode. As you guys are watching these shows live, be sure you're dropping comments. It gives us just another way to interact with you guys live on the show. And we certainly appreciate you guys for doing that. If you are watching live, we would still encourage you to go subscribe to the podcast feed. It should be available anywhere you stream your podcasts. If there's a place you get podcasts and it's not there, let me know and I'll try to get it submitted and processed out there. But I think it's about everywhere right now. On the Shane page, it is its own feed. It only has a test episode, and then this one will be in there. So make sure you're looking at that, not the old BGN episodes. And then again, if you would like to support the podcast, because again, we're independent now, we're paying our own hosting, all that sort of stuff, you can do so through a PayPal or a Cash App that I created for us. You can find it on the Shane page, just like our podcast name. And I will tweet that out as well. So we really appreciate you guys showing up for this, showing your support. I was overwhelmed with support, with messages and comments and things from you guys. So again, really appreciate it. Certainly glad to be back in the podcasting chair here after a couple weeks off, connecting with Jonny. And like I said earlier, we'll get you guys day 1 and 2 defensive prospects next week. But Jonny, before we get out of here, any final thoughts that you want to say?
Yeah, I'll try to start it nice and quickly. I genuinely can't believe you just said 500 are listening live. That has absolutely blown my mind, especially because we do it at weird timings. Because obviously it's 6 o'clock here, but where you are, I'm guessing a lot of Americans this afternoon. So that's blown me away. Yeah, we do put a lot of work into this. Shane is the man behind the scenes who does everything, like in terms of like the hosting and stuff. And podcasts are a lot of work. They may not seem it, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on. So yeah, we're going to talk about off air, like over the summer. Maybe some ideas about Patreon, anything you guys that you want us to see, like subscription tiers. We would never, ever go like behind the paywall ever. But the number one thing, we are a brand new podcast. We don't have Eagles in the name, which is always great. In our name, we've got a full on the Shane page name. So please, iTunes rankings, 5-star reviews. You guys know the drill. Everyone says it. We've always said it as well before, but it's a little bit different now. We're starting something new from scratch. But yeah, 500 is wild. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to boring you with way too many defensive names that I have looked at. And Shane will learn not to ask me for a couple of names. He's never draft podcasted with me before, guys. We've never done. We started the season. Shane doesn't know the way I do the draft. A couple of names is not something that's ever come out of my mouth. So if you can keep me to single digit most of the time, I think that's a positive change.
All right. What Jonny doesn't know is I actually have the ability to mute his mic from my end in StreamYard. So I might just have to put you on a timer next week.
Yeah, sounds good. It may be needed when I start talking about Johnny Newton and later, but we will get to them next week.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys for joining in. We will catch you next week on another episode of On the Shane Page.